Thank you, La Casita, and thank you, Benny, for this beautiful opportunity to discuss our anthology. The Abuela Stories Project is an anthology that has 50 photographs by Daisy Arroyo. It has 15 writers, including myself, and it has 7 models. And the models are abuelas who are not your typical abuelas. And this book, this collection is so close to our hearts. It was first place in the International Latino Book Awards for Best Latina Themed Book, and it was also second place for Best Poetry Book. And this project was inspired because at the age of 35, I became an abuela. And I, by no means, am a traditional abuela. There's no way. And I wasn't ready to be put into certain categories. I wasn't ashamed of being an abuela. I was celebrating it, but I was also very unconventional. And to this day, my relationship with my granddaughter is very unconventional. We talk very often. She's very much an artist. And it started this conversation of, well, what are abuelas supposed to look like? And I went to a conference where I was actually having manuscripts reviewed. And one of the reviewers said to me, well, we don't need any more abuela stories. And I was like, what do you mean we don't need abuela stories? Abuela stories are timeless. And my abuela story is not the same abuela story that Daisy has or that anyone else has. And of course we need more abuela stories. And so I was very moved by that. And I was also at the same time, very impassioned and very angered by it. So I decided to reach out to my community. And I was very grateful to the Bronx Council on the Arts because they were able to provide me a grant that paid for some of the labor and the changes and the decisions that Daisy and I made. But Daisy and I also met very organically. And I tend to do that. We met at the Bronx Museum of Art. And it was an event where she was there as an artist herself, taking photographs, and I was there to participate in the live music, and I was dancing around like a lunatic. And I just went up to her, and there was something about her and watching her work. And I said, I think you're the one that I'm looking for. Because I was looking for someone to collaborate with, someone to go through this process with me. And I know many artists, but it didn't feel right. And when I met her, Daisy was kind of like, oh my God, I don't know you. And I'm not sure what you're talking about. But I go very much with what my spirit and my core says. And I was like, you're the one I'm looking for. So let's work together. And the picture that you see to your left is my grandmother who inspired the cover of this anthology. My grandmother, Ana Dolores Acosta de Dominguez. And she was a woman who I knew of her death because I was around when she passed, but I knew very little about her life. And as I started asking questions and kind of poking and prodding, and some families are built on secrecy. They don't want to say very much about anything. But with Abuela, who we call, and I still call Mama Abuelita, there was so much about her that I had to discover recently. And I decided to honor her by putting her on the cover because I feel like we all know about her death, but we don't know about her life. And now, even now, just last year, I learned so much about her in bits and pieces and fragments. And that's what inspired for me this project. And now I'm gonna hand it over to Daisy so she can talk about why she said yes to this crazy woman who kind of jumped on top of her and was like, I'm looking for you.
I want to thank everyone for joining. And I want to thank La Casita for displaying our work. I'm honored, to say the least. And thank you for Benny as well for putting everything together. He's been amazing. It's funny because as Peggy said, when we met, it was like at the spur of the moment and it was meant to be. And she had asked me about, coming on this project with her. And it's funny because my relationship that I have with my grandmother is different from her grandmother. her relationship that she had with her grandmother. So there was things that were absent in her relationship, but she had memories and tales that she heard of. I actually was, you know, living with my grandmother every other weekend just to spend time with her. And I was blessed with having her in my life, and she's still in my life. And we have such a great relationship. And I've always, always wanted to honor her in a way. And I always asked myself since I was a little girl, what can I do to honor my grandmother that would give her the respect and the honor that she deserves? And my grandmother was always in the background, cooking, taking care of everyone, making sure everyone was fed and happy. And one day in taking on this project, I went to go visit her on a Saturday afternoon, and she was doing her thing. She was guayando, grating yuca to make a dish. In the background, if you could see in the background, I don't know if you see him, but my grandfather was there. And my grandfather has passed now, but my grandmother's still alive. And she always nurtured the family. And that was the shot to me that was magic. And that was one of the reasons why it was one of the first photos in the book, because it started out the series. Mm-hmm. And I just, you know, in doing this project, I never thought that I would really like go back to my childhood in the way that I did. And it was just a beautiful, organic experience. And with that being said, I'm going to pass it on to Peggy so that she can recite the first poem.
Thank you, Daisy. If you could move to the next slide, it would be wonderful. Thank you so much. So this is the first poem that I created for this project about my grandmother. And I had not written about my grandmother because like I said, there was so many missing pieces and mysteries and things, but the more I watch my mother age, she looks more like my grandmother. The more I watch, when I look at my granddaughter, I'm like, you look so much like my grandmother. So I'm just gonna read it and then we'll move on. But it's titled, Why I Write About Abuela. Because Dolores means pain, grief, and sorrow. Because you never genuinely smiled in photos. Because your story should be more than just your eulogy. Because you swallowed every curse that should have tied his ankles and wrists. Because he silenced you long before the first time he lunged for your throat. Because you sang Odilio Gonzalez's boleros aloud, hoping he would get the message. Because you wish you could have held all 24 of your children a bit longer. Because you held each of the underdeveloped children that slid down your thigh for too long. Because you named all your daughters after saints like Maria and Altagracia, hoping to save them. Because I can only recall your voice reciting the rosary. Because I inherited your fractured heart. Because you were born and died May 26th, but I question if you were ever allowed to really live. Because Papi died May 26th, and Mommy says you held his hand. Because I ask for your blessing every morning. Because Mommy is wearing your face now. Because I will one day wear your face. Because my granddaughter will one day wear your face. Because I want to say your name. Because I want to find you. So, as I said, these bits and pieces that came to me of her story, my grandmother did have 24 children, and she also had many miscarriages. My grandmother was also heavily abused by my grandfather. And, you know, people, like I said, some families are built on secrets and they don't want to say the truth about who people really are. But the more I pry, the more I question, the more I found out bits and pieces. And my grandmother did pass on May 26th. She was born on the 26th. So she made a full cycle of life. She came out of the earth and back into the earth on a full cycle, which is considered a blessing. And then my father, who also passed on May 26th. So to my mother, May 26th is such an important date. And when my father passed, my mother said, you know, Mama is holding his hand. And I found that to be such a peaceful statement for all of us who were in mourning. So Benny, we can go to the next slide. All right. So I'm going to let Daisy speak about these photos because these are some of the powerful abuelas that we encountered.
So in doing each photo shoot, it was pretty amazing. Many times we didn't know what to expect. I never met anyone prior to going to the photo shoot. Many times that was the case. So it was kind of like we were walking and taking like little steps, but not knowing where we were going with it. And it was interesting. How I came up with each vision for each abuela was through conversation, through getting to know the subject, talking to them about their abuela stories, what type of abuela do they see themselves as, and through conversation, I would gently take out the camera, and it was done organically. And when the time was right, is when I would start shooting. So I wanted to make sure that each subject, I captured the essence of each subject through an image. Because of the fact that this project meant so much to me, I wanted to honor and respect my grandmother through the work that I put into this project. Olga is very amazing. She's, you know, as you can see, she doesn't even look like a grandmother. And so it was really funny. So we pull up and I meet this beautiful, stunning woman. She comes out and she's like, hey, and she's so free-spirited. And we were so blessed to have beautiful weather and walk through an actual forest in Staten Island. And this was one of the first images I took of her when I asked her how she felt about her grandson. And I just saw strength in her, and I asked her, can you please just make a muscle? Because she's an artist, and she's actually a clay artist. So she uses her arms a lot, her hands. So she's very muscular because of that. And I wanted to just bring that out in this image. And that's what I got from it. And I hope that, you know, you can capture the essence through what I was seeing through the lens. Now we move on to Elena Mamarazzi, who's extremely creative, very colorful, very bubbly, but yet, you know, she's so educated, and she has a way of capturing history. And how she does that is through photography. She documents events that have happened in El Barrio. And it was just amazing. With her, I went to her home. So she let me into a very intimate space. And when she opened the door and she had this t-shirt on, I wanted to like drop to the floor. You know, she plays congas. She's just multifaceted, as all these women are. And I wanted to show just the essence of her love for photography. And she had a whole collection of cameras that were passed down to her. And I thought that was pretty amazing. So that's how I came to these shots.
Absolutely. Yes, yes, yes. Benny, we can move on to the next slide, please. Okay, cool. It's so great that I selected these pieces from the anthology, and one of this particular writer is actually with us, so it's awesome, and I hope I do justice in reading it, because Rebecca Lois Lucret is incredible. So again, the anthology is unique in that it is not just, oh, we love our grandmothers and they're great. We do, but there's also very complex pieces written in this anthology, because grandmas are complex. We tend to not know them very well. We don't know if they were scandalous. We don't know if they had like multiple lives that they were living. But this particular piece, and it is in Spanish, and it's narrated, it's a voice of a grandmother who's extremely frustrated at how she's being viewed. So I'm going to read it. And if you have questions about it later, you can ask, or you can even ask the author because she's here in our audience, so it's great. Me pintan. Me pintan de cocina, me pintan ama de casa, me pintan canosa o calva. A veces me tienen un poco de piedad y me pintan de pañuelo, me pintan sin dientes, me pintan doblada, ciega, débil, loca, lenta, me pintan de bastón y de batas anchas. El cuerpo ya no existe. Me pintan de árbol, cada arruga como cada anillo, acercándome a los últimos años. Me pintan estrujada y después me toman la foto y lo llaman arte. Me pintan sin tetas o de tetas planchadas o de tetas que alcanzan las rodillas. Me pintan de hambre, me pintan sin azúcar, sin sólido, sin arroz, sin dulce. Ni siquiera me dan un chin de sal. Di que la presión. Me pintan de artritis, me pintan mal de corazón, de cáncer, de diabetes, pero sí me pintan eficiente para cuidar los moscosos. Me pintan sola. A veces tengo la familia, pero nunca las amistades, nunca el marido. Resulta que siempre muero primero. Y te pregunto, y es fácil. So basically in this poem, the narrator, who is an abuela who is very upset at how they are making her appear to the world, and she's frustrated, and she says, they paint me bald and wrinkled, and then they put a camera in front of me and call it art. And then at the end, she says, they always paint me alone, without family, never with friends or a husband. But they always paint her efficient enough to take care of the kids. And she asks at the end, and you think this is easy? So this poem directly speaks to how some grandmothers feel. They're not ready to be in a rocking chair and knitting. They're ready to keep living life. And they don't want to compromise. It is an absolutely brilliant piece. So yes, Benny, we can move to the next slide. Uh-oh, Benny, where you at? There you are.
Tamara.
Tamara.
So my influence and my inspiration behind these photos were nature. In interviewing each model, I wanted to get a little bit to know about their lives and what made them who they were, the stories of their grandchildren, and the stories that were, you know, tied to them as a person. And it just so happens that the first time I met Tamara was that day that we did the shoot, like I did with other models. And again, it was something we had conversation, a long conversation. It was a very cold day, and we walked through the woods, and we just ended in places that were organic. And it just so happens that I saw this beautiful, beautiful tree. Although the tree was dead, it just spoke to me. And it's funny because when we took the picture, afterwards, she just looked at me and said, you know, I have a thing with trees. And it was just, I felt as if every time that I photographed each model, that I was being guided to take each picture. And it was just very spiritual. And then we come to Shihan Waratsi. Wow, what a powerhouse. I mean, this image speaks for itself. Wow. So I had asked her to come in an outfit that speaks of who she wanted to represent, what type of abuela she wanted to represent, what her strengths were. And she came dressed in martial arts clothing. And it was just, again, magical. I can't really put it into words. It's something that through conversation, all these images came out. And I felt that I reached an intimate place with each subject that allowed me to bring me into a space that would create these images. And that's pretty much, it was very powerful.
Absolutely.
If
I'm
we,
just gonna add that Shihan Warichi is also the highest ranking female jiu-jitsu martial artist on the East Coast. She still holds that title. So, and she's also a historian for the Taino community in the Bronx. She holds the Taino Awards every year. And Tamara is an amazing, multifaceted, multidimensional artist, mother. This photo doesn't show it, but she's heavily tattooed. So when you see her, you may not think Abuela, but she's one of the most gentle souls. And her exterior is completely the opposite. So there are other photographs in the anthology where you can see that. She's heavily, heavily tattooed, and they're beautiful. But this image of the tree was one that Daisy and I could not, we just couldn't get over how beautiful it was. Yeah, so these women are powerhouses. And this anthology is just displaying that to the world, basically.
yeah.
These ladies reside in El Bronx, in the Bronx.
And I wanted to add that these images were actually taken first before matched to the poem. So everything was pretty organic from beginning to end.
Yes, I wanted to say that as well, that in the beginning, for each model, I wrote an introduction for each model, like a definition, based on everything that they shared while they were just talking to us. Basically just talking to us, telling us what they're called. Not everyone is called Abuela. Some of them are called Ita, some of them are called Nina. It depended, and we took all that information. And something magical that did happen, and I know we keep saying these words magical and organic because I think that everything kind of just came into fruition very genuinely, was that when I presented the writers with the photographs, I said, okay, pick one that speaks to you. And I would give them prompts. We had 2 sessions of workshops, and they ended up writing poems that were very much matched to the model. And they don't know each other. Yeah. For example, Claudia Whittingham wrote a poem to one of Tamara's pictures, and they both share the same story in that their grandmothers were not loving and warm. They were actually very neglectful and abusive. But they gravitated towards each other. So it was very interesting to watch that process unfold.
Yeah.
Benny, can you move to the next slide? I feel crazy saying that. I feel like, all right. So this next piece speaks to legacy. Tambores de Huracanes, and it's by Mia Andino, who is a visual artist, an amazing poet, a wonderful friend. And I'm so grateful that she said yes to contributing her work for this project. So, Tambores de Huracanes. Abuela said that your heart is your first drum. It carries rhythm between 2 lungs, and there is a church inside. For every prayer that has been silenced, Abuela remembered being silenced. Tongue stripped of power, beauty, and accents. So she escaped with Puerto Rico on her back, became huracanes when she couldn't feel it there. Islands moving across her dented fingernails until she could see its shape. And she said, she will be this drum, until memories stop falling from her eyes, until the mix of 151 and brute no longer make her stomach churn, until she could face mirrors again. And she will be this drum until she could forget lies knuckled into her thighs, until the morivivi of hands unclenches her throat, until her past stops trying to deny her la bendición of old age. And many of the pieces in this book are written in Spanish, English, and Spanglish, because that's the way that our abuelas function in the world, in this anthology. Some of them don't speak Spanish. Mamarasi, she was like, I don't speak Spanish, but I am very much who I am. And I'm very much Puerto Rican. Other women were like, I speak a mix of English and Spanish, something kind of Spanglish. So I wanted to honor the truth of that. So you will find that this anthology does have pieces like that. All right, Benny, moving along. All right, Daisy, you're up.
So this picture is Maggie. So Maggie, this is an interesting story. Maggie, when we first met with Maggie, we met her in her place of, in her place of employment. And she was we didn't quite get the essence of who she was through that. I think it was a bit rushed, the meeting. And I wasn't satisfied with getting the essence of who she was and getting the right photographs for this project. So we rescheduled. We kept on rescheduling, and we were never able to really get a date until finally one day we got a date. We met up in a park, and it just so happens that she was in a very spiritual place in her life, and she was totally a different person from the first time that we met. And I was so happy that we did reschedule, because this series of photos, that her second series, which was the series that we put in the book, was more spiritual, and it was just her more at peace. And we were able to get into her space and be able to come up with a series that was good for the book. If you notice, all the images are in sepia tone. And that was my intention, to create everything as a memory, because I wanted it to fall in line with what we were doing with the book. And so a lot of people have asked me, why is everything the same color? Because usually you have portraits and you have people that are, in different spaces, and they're different colors and everyone looks different. But not that I wanted everything so monotone, it's just I wanted it to resemble a dream or a memory. And that's the whole purpose of the sepia tone with the fading of the photographs.
Mm-hmm. And for Maggie, she had cut her hair from the first time we met her.
Mm-hmm.
Again, on this very spiritual journey, she was releasing all this weight that she had carried for centuries. She was saying not physical weight, but like emotional weight. And she was in a place of like reconstruction. So when we saw her this time, she was so much more relaxed, and she was able to speak differently about herself. We found out she was like a freestyle singer. Nobody even, none of us knew that. So we caught these beautiful images of her in nature. And then I paired it, when laying out this book, I paired it with this particular piece by Vanessa Chica Ferreira, who's an amazing poet, teacher, and editor now of a online magazine called Ice Colony. She, because she was talking about this emotional weight. And then Vanessa's piece speaks to this emotional weight that many of our abuelas carried, with being emotionally or physically abused. So this piece is called What Abuela Carried. Abuela carried the weight of her country silently, while Abuelo worked Trujillo's fields. He reminded her that he gave her that rib. She tended to the boys and the one girl, the wild one, whom she attempted to tame with broomsticks and tight braids. Abuela let go of her country once she arrived to the United States, unwilling to return, not even for a visit, while Abuelo made frequent trips, making children without her. And I believe that the author is also part of this conversation. So she's here somewhere. But again, and there are more painful stories. There are joyful stories. There's a short story in there that's extremely nostalgic. But there are painful pieces, because abuelas are multifaceted. Abuelas are not just one archetype. So I think we wanted to humanize abuelas and give them, the space that to grow and be who they are. Because for us, abuela is this almost like a mythical creature, right? But we don't think of our abuela as being scandalous. So Benny, can we move to the next slide? Thank you. So this is a piece by Claudia Whittingham, who is also an amazing artist, writer, bead worker. She lives in Manhattan. She's a priestess of Lukumi. She's an amazing woman. So she wrote this piece called She Shifted the Weight. She pushed the weight of her grandmother's tongue from her mouth, making way for foreign teeth, ripping the truth away from her own beauty. He reminded her, I gave you that rib. What you gonna give me? Feet never cradled the earth. Sharp grains of sand never harbored between her toes. Red clay never soothed the trials of her life. There are no flowers here, he said, as he reminded her. I gave you that rib. What you gonna give me? She spit out her grandmother's tongues. Ashanti lullabies morphed into jazz beats. adrift in the ocean near the bones of those craving the comfort of Yemaya's palace. Shifting into Olokun's domain, salty waters exploding over chains of glittering flesh, and all the lies their ancestors told themselves in languages foreign to their souls because they had to survive. She spit out her grandmother's tongues in my mouth. Those tongues took root in rhythms and melodies, flowing between a rib carved into my teeth and planted flowers that have never been trampled by feet. So if you notice, there are some of the recurrent themes about ribs and from our workshops. You know, I wanted to give the writers an opportunity to kind of create together in a space. So you'll find certain references about ribs, and it comes from our work together. But I really have so much love for every single woman author. And I have to say that it's a woman-based project. So all the authors, all the writers are women. Bennie, next slide. All right.
Yeah. So here is the collage of more images. Some abuelas that you didn't get to see in the other slides prior to this, because we had to kind of like, not because of the fact that one was better than the other, it's just I had to narrow it down. And as you can see, these are like, it's one picture each of each model. And I just wanted to highlight my favorites from the series, only because when you have that photographer subject connection, I can't explain it into words. It's just a feeling. And so I can remember how I felt every time I took, like when I took this shot, like every separate shot that I took, I remember what I was thinking. So it was very special to me. So these, like for instance, if you look at Tamara behind the fence, we were having an intimate conversation and she was behind the fence and it was very cold outside. And for some reason, I was able to capture a tear coming down her eyes. And it was just very organic. With Two Moons, she was kind of giving praise to the sun. I mean, you have Maggie in intimate prayer. You have Olga with her beautiful art. You have Waratsi with a crown. And then you have, I wanted to show an image of Mama Waratzi's face because I was, in the book, I took a lot of pictures of her hands and what she was actually doing, like the back of her head, because she has a tattoo of Puerto Rican flag on her back. And I think that each model represents different facets of what grandmothers are. And this is just how I wanted to end the presentation.
And I have to say there are 50 images in this anthology. So it's not just, like I said, 7 models, but there's 50 photographs. And there's everything from dancers to artists to historians to Two Moons, who is actually from the Chickasaw Nation. So there, again, if you, I would love it if you get the collection, you can experience it firsthand. So many people have told me, I have it as a coffee table book because it's so beautiful. And I'm like, yes, that's great. That's wonderful. And I've also had many teachers at universities and professors reach out to me and say, you know, I made my students buy this because I wanted them to see what they can create in the world. And I absolutely am a believer that we can create anything that we set our mind to, that we visualize, and that we don't see. So whenever I hear, you know, we don't need another Abuela story, I'm like, yeah, we do. So I'm gonna end the presentation. Bennie, with the next slide. Okay. So these, you know, grandmothers have a way of giving you advice, and some of it doesn't make sense to you, and it's kind of humorous, and some of them you're like, really? So this poem reminded me of the advice that was handed down from my grandmother to my aunts and my mother. And some of them don't make sense, but I'm like, okay. And I remember doing them and not knowing why we're doing this. And some of them do absolutely make sense. So consejos or advice. Consejos that remind me I am her granddaughter. Always wash your panties by hand. Never put your cartera on the floor. Don't cut your hair while on your period. And Nochebuena, burn incense right before midnight. Feed the birds leftover bread, they're God's messengers. Put a glass of water under your bed to prevent nightmares. Wear red lipstick to drown out the dark circles under your eyes. Don't stand in front of an open freezer after you get out of the shower. Soak cebolla in honey for 3 days. Take a spoonful para la congestión. Blend garlic, pimiento verde, and cilantro for a stockpile of sofrito. Keep it in the fridge. Stash small bundles of cash tied with a red ribbon in all of your plaster cast saints. When you have a cold, put Vicks on the soles of your feet and cover them with socks. Collect snow from the first winter storm and mop your floors with it. Eso es agua bendita. Put a glass of water by the front door to absorb negative energy and bochinche from your neighbors. Always talk to water. It holds memoria. Escucha. It's a mouthpiece to God. So thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. And we've come to the end and we have enough time for Q&A, for talking. As I said, some of the authors are here to, and I think Tamara, one of the models, is here as well. And I also want to say that in the chat, I'm going to put a link. So what I started doing before COVID was that I used to go around and take the book, and I used to collect Abuela stories in small pieces of paper. Because for me, these small pieces of paper, I'm going to show you one that my mother, I still have. This is from ages ago. But they used to write notes on very, very, very small pieces of paper and just kind of give it to you. Sometimes, you know, they would tuck them into their bras or they would hold them in their purses. So I used to collect Abuela stories on these little slips of paper, and it became like a rotating, traveling installation piece along with the book. And people loved sharing their stories, even if they were tragic. They just wanted to let us know. And they're very short. Some people would say, you know, my grandmother was terrible. Or other people would say, I never met her, but I wish I did. Other people would say, oh, she fed me chocolate con pan every Saturday. So I started collecting all of them. But what I did now, because of COVID, since I can't physically connect with people, and that's something that I love to do, is that I set up abuelastories.com/myabuela, which I'll put in the chat, so that you can please send us your small Abuela story and we'll publish it as well, so that people can read your story and know about your Abuela. Or you can just say, I never met her, but I would have loved to because. So I will definitely put that in the chat. And now I'm gonna pass the mic to Tere and Benny, and we'll see how this goes.